We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey & Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Epic. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.
Hi, I'm Katie Dean, Executive Editor of the Cap Times, and I'd like to welcome you to Cap Times Idea Fest 2021. This is the festival's 5th year, featuring both live and virtual sessions. Our theme this year is Reckoning with Change, and there's certainly been a lot of that. Staging Idea Fest is always a big lift, and we couldn't do it without Cap Times members. If you're not already, I hope you'll consider becoming one. Not only do members help shape events like this one, but they support an independent and trustworthy local media source at a critical time. Find details online at membership.captimes.com. Finally, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, as well as our numerous other sponsors. So please, enjoy this session. You'll find other festival videos at captimesideafest.com.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2021 Cap Times Ideas Fest. Our panel today is called The Bottom Line is Not a Race to the Bottom. Business advocacy is changing in the United States. It's no longer as much about right and left and more about wrong and right. And what we see are businesses looking at their bottom lines differently, looking at their operations differently. Acronyms like ESG, DACA, DEI, BLM are on the lips of nearly every executive and discussed in every single boardroom. Businesses are increasingly looking at different ways to differentiate themselves with their employees, with their customers, with their investors, and they're looking at their role differently. Their influence on things like climate change and social responsibility, equity, human rights writ large are now focal points for businesses as they think about what the future might be for them and their operations. They're becoming more transparent about their operations, about their employee relations, and about their wages. And today I'm joined by 2 commerce leaders who will help us dig into that phenomenon to understand the change and predict what the future might look like. So joining me today from DC is Carolyn Cowley. She is the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and she's the senior vice president of the U.S. Chamber. It's the world's largest business organization that represents nearly 3 million active business organizations in this country. Under her leadership, the foundation has launched signature programs that bring more information and more opportunity to distressed communities. They engage MBA students in the future of business leadership. They've tackled and given information and resources on the opioid crisis. And they've showcased innovations across many sectors about what the future could and should look like in our economy. She joined the Chamber Foundation in 2015, and she has more than 20 years of leadership experience at the executive level in public service and in the business community. In politics, she was a speechwriter for George H.W. Bush, and she was later an aide for California Governor Pete Wilson. Her husband's military career took them to the Middle East, and an entrepreneur at heart, she did not sit idle, and she started an organization that created an English language business magazine for Egypt's newly blossoming democracy and economy. And she's also a proud Badger mom. So welcome, Carol. Also joining me today is my friend Jessica Cavazos. She is the president and CEO of the Latino Chamber of Commerce and serves on the board of directors for the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Throughout her career, Jessica has been deeply involved in organizations that build and support communities. She has served as a secretary and the board member of the National Association of Hispanic Federal Executives in the Midwest region, and she's the former state director of the Women's Activities for the League of United Latin American Citizens. Prior to joining the chamber, she was the president of the Eliva Group, an organization whose mission is to create social programs to help nonprofits with governance issues. She also worked as a congressional liaison for 8 years. She's received many awards in our community and around our state, and most recently she was named Hispanic Woman of the Year for her volunteerism and community advocacy. So thank you for joining us, Jessica.
Thank you.
I want to start with a story about how the Greater Madison Chamber got started, and then I want to talk to each of you about the lineage and the history of how you got started. But the story of this chamber goes back to the early 1900s, and Madison had a population of 19,500 or so people, and the goal was to get to 40,000 within 10 years. And so they created a group called the 40,000 Club. And the idea was that the business community would unify under this one umbrella, this one initiative to double the population and grow the workforce of Madison. They failed, and they got to 28, 29,000 in that decade. But what they learned in that was that coordinated action for collective good was a path forward. And because of that, they formed what it became the Madison Board of Commerce, and then ultimately the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, which is a live wire, as they called it, organization that's designed to coalesce members around collective thought, collective action, and collective good. What hasn't changed, despite the names, is that when you go back to our founding documents, one of the original words that were written, and there's two phrases that stand out to me, is that they said that all that we will write in the coming pages will be written from the we perspective. So it was very much about the we and not the me. And so return on community, not return on investment. And the other was that the surest way to build up the surest way to build up the business of a community is to first build up the humanity of a community. And I think there's a trend here, or a thread at least, that we see across the country. And so with that, Carolyn, I'd be interested as to how the U.S. Chamber got started. What's the story of why these business organizations came together in D.C. and started the nation's Chamber of Commerce?
Sure. Well, thank you, Zach, and thank you, Jessica, for letting me be with you today. Listening to you tell that really beautiful story about the Madison Chamber's origins, I think back to how the U.S. Chamber of Commerce got started, which was about the same time. For us, it was 109 years ago. And what happened was in 1911, President Taft, who was president at the time, sent a message to Congress calling for the business community to unify into a national voice. And as we have sometimes joked here, it was sort of like the modern day Henry Kissinger saying, who do I call when I want to call the EU, right? Like if you've got the American business community, who can we talk to? Who represents them? And so what happened was about 450 or so local chambers, small town chambers from around the country, literally put money in a hat to start the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And they had a convention for 2 days, and they got the bylaws done, and they got it done. And we've been working ever since. But I wanted to share with you another nice part of that story, which is that we have a beautiful historic building across the street from the White House that was designed and built at the same time and the same architect as the U.S. Supreme Court. It's really a wonderful place to come to work every day in Washington. But as a historic building, we have this enormous bronze plaque in our lobby. It is truly the size of a wall, and it lists all of those 400 or so chambers who got us started state by state. And I was surprised to find, Zach, that there are 35 chambers from Wisconsin who helped start the U.S. Chamber, and they run from Appleton to Beloit to Eau Claire and Kenosha and the Madison Chamber. So we're sort of separated at birth, maybe, I'd like to think.
Yeah. I didn't know that. That's great. It's a great
It was just a really nice beginning. But on top of those chambers, thousands of individual business owners wrote checks, $1 check, a $5 check, really hyper-local barbershops and machine shops. And we still have a logbook of that. It's about 10 inches thick, like an old-fashioned Bible that recorded every single person. And so it's just a really nice beginning for us. We're really true to those roots today, with about 1,500 state and local chambers as members. And we're in contact with them every single day. And I know we'll get to that later in this discussion. So
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Jessica, how about you? What was it that began the Latino Chamber of Commerce?
I want to say it was community and having a sense of need. Although we're not 109 and 6 years old, but we are now going on our 18th year. And for many Latino and Hispanic Midwest chambers, we are old, right? We are getting, I want to say we are in our teenage years, just like our age. And being that there was such a need back in the turn of the millennium for Latino advocacy in Madison, being a smaller city as far as population rate, compared to like Milwaukee. The chamber was formed through Madison College and the desire of one instructor at Madison College. Her name was Maria Buñuelos, to see that our Latino-owned businesses had advocacy and had partners in the community that would look for their well-being and their success. At that time, we didn't have a lot of Latino-owned businesses in Madison, but they were growing. And there was a disjointness as far as, connecting with the greater community. And I also know that, or I've heard, that you were part of that collective group of leaders that came together to support the Latino community and their desire to assemble. And that happened in 2003. I know that in 2004, a more collective group of people came together at Madison College, and then they decided what the organization was going to be like, whether it was going to be a business association or a chamber. So for many Latino organizations, unlike San Antonio, that was one of the first chambers in the United States with a huge population, I even become a little jealous when I hear their numbers of membership, right? When you have 23,000 members compared to our 500, right? That these organizations, have those deep roots of people who invested in them. And so the Madison Chamber invested in the Latino Chamber. Madison College invested in our birth, and 40 other Latino leaders within the county saying, how do we create a mechanism for advocacy that works and, as you said, as a collective, will support the growth of our Latino-owned businesses and also policy around Latino growth and best practices, right? And so in 2008, we became a nonprofit, a 501c6. In 2019, we became a statewide chamber, the Wisconsin Latino Chamber of Commerce. And since then, our growth has been very imperative on these partnerships, on the partnerships of Madison College and the Greater Madison Chamber and others around the state. So that's just some of what I know. I think you could actually teach me some of the things that happened when I wasn't around.
I mean, it's interesting that you say, because I couldn't imagine the ecosystem without you today. Like, I couldn't imagine what this community would have been like had we not had it. I'm curious, Carolyn, why two organizations? What's the role of the U.S. Chamber Foundation versus the chamber itself? What's the difference between the two? Why two organizations?
Sure. Well, first of all, fundamentally, there's a legal distinction. The chamber is a C6 advocacy organization. The foundation is a C3 nonprofit education organization. And so we have a shared philosophy, of course, about jobs and opportunity and prosperity, but we go about it in different ways. And I think we see ourselves as kind of two wings of the same airplane. We are working with different constituencies, both in companies and in communities. I would describe the foundation, because we don't do the advocacy work. We, of course, don't take a position on legislation or policy. But we comprise 5 centers of excellence that I think really track in an interesting way with the evolution of society and business and the chambers. We are working at the nexus of business and communities. So while the Chamber is working at the nexus of business and society and legislative and policy work, the foundation is really about bringing businesses together for collective impact and greater collective impact in communities. So that's the work we do every day. We comprise at this point 5 centers of excellence. Again, I think these track in an interesting way with developments in society and within companies, but we've got a very robust corporate citizenship center, a Center for Education and Workforce, and our Hiring Our Heroes program has just been outstanding for many years now. So, as issues and topics become priorities and concerns and opportunities for businesses and communities, we're the right place to be that nexus between them.
I was watching the Fast Forward series that you put together, that the foundation put together, where you're really talking about the future of different industries, different sectors. And one of the things that caught my attention was when the voice overlay, it said why you were bringing all these people together and all these experts together, and it said celebrating business as a force for good. And I thought that was an interesting way to sort of maybe wrap a bow around what the foundation's goal is, which is to really showcase how business can be a force for good, which is the conversation the 3 of us are going to have today.
Absolutely. And I know that we'll be talking probably in depth later on in this discussion about the pandemic, but I would say that the pandemic sharpened our mission statement. And so we've gotten even tighter than business as a force for good, which of course it has always been. We come to work every day knowing that business as an essential problem solver. And that has really been a role that business has met the moment, and the foundation and the Chamber has in the last, how long have we been doing this? 20 plus months. So thank you for putting that bow on it.
Yep. So Jessica, I'm curious, in your time as CEO, and Carolyn, I'm going to ask you the same questions, but what's changed in the organization? I mean, you alluded to you're now a statewide organization, right?
Correct.
But we've seen tremendous growth under your leadership. But I'm curious as to, what have you seen inside the 4 corners of the Chamber and outside in the community that's changed during your leadership?
I do believe it has to do with fine-tuning our mission and resonating that mission with our community, and giving them the capacity to have the confidence of growth. I do see Latino populations as evolving. I do also see huge disparities, and so in the past 5 years, my mission, and mind you, the policy and legislative side of things in the back of my mind are so resound, because now I try to tie in everything that I learned in the congressional office, as far as immigration issues and workforce issues, and I tie it back to the Chamber and what we can do to resolve some of those issues, those gaps, using the population that is the fastest growing minority group in the United States. So one of the biggest issues I've seen in the past 5 years when I arrived is we had a membership at about 150 member businesses. And I would look at it and I would say, well, where are they coming from? And who are these businesses and who are these associations? 60% of those are nonprofits, that were powering our Chamber. And not to say that I didn't appreciate their membership, because of course we appreciated it. But I was just like, there has to be more businesses. There has to be more individuals out there, entrepreneurs who are looking to become part of this association and who want to mobilize change and who want to become those conduits to change, as you described in your introduction. What I noticed is a lot of people didn't know what chambers of commerce do. So then my job as the new executive director of this organization was to teach the population to start from scratch and say, chambers of commerce are associations, and associations are groups of individuals who unite for a common goal and mission, right? And so it was very hard to change that mindset of some of our business owners, that we were not a government agency looking at their business as an entity that had to change their metrics or their way of doing things because we felt that that's how it should be. It was more so that we wanted to become their partner, their ally, We wanted to find out what their ailments are so that we could create programs and create opportunities for them to scale and develop wealth, and to understand what opportunities, procurement, and so many other things that were out there. And I think in the past 5 years, we've got there, right? So, you know, not only did we go from 150 from September 16th, you know, of 2016 to now having 560 businesses statewide. It's also educating the public of who the Latino Chamber is, why we exist, and you've been an ally in that. And I know that this is a story that many people don't know, but even the public has asked, why do we need a Latino chamber when we have the Madison Chamber? And Zach, in that one email that you sent that one constituent, it was interesting of how you phrased it, and I so felt like I had an ally. Like, that's exactly what I need our partners to do, to create that space for us to exist and to thrive, and to be able to create services for our members, and also give them the voice, right, as an advocacy organization. But in the past 5 years, it's not just about growing our membership, it's about advocacy and moving the needle forward as to why these business owners, these micro businesses, have a need to exist, and also uplift their communities locally, and how they uplift the economy, right? And so I'll tell you that I've learned a lot in the past 5 years. Madison is a whole different community and population than Milwaukee, so I've had to adjust myself even to this community and its politics and its foresight of what it wants. And I'll tell you, I have such an appreciation and love for Madison, because it is solutions driven. You know, it does want to find a solution. It might take us, like, you know, 12 meetings to get something started, but it is very solutions driven, and our chamber is thriving at this moment here in Madison.
But two thoughts from what you just said. One, a change I've seen, and I respect and love this about you, is that you use the word wealth. Like, you don't shy away from it. And I think sometimes people think that the pursuit of wealth, distributed wealth,
That's
generational
right.
wealth,
Mm-hmm.
but the use of wealth sometimes is seen as a negative.
Right.
And that you don't shy from it, and that
No.
you say this is what we're about, is about
Right.
creating wealth, distributed wealth within our community.
Correct.
And we're seeing it. I was in Watertown recently. And so this is Carolyn, a small town between Milwaukee and Madison and Jefferson County. And there was a Latino grocery store.
Correct.
There was a Latino restaurant that I walked into, and everybody working there was Latino. And so it's not just Madison and Milwaukee.
That's
We're
correct.
not just seeing in our urban areas. We're seeing Latino businesses take hold across the state.
Of course.
And I think it's interesting that you say that, you know, you see yourself being pulled into every direction.
Correct.
You know, are there similarities and differences that you see around the state?
You know, I see, you know, some of the perceptions that we have as far as Latino wealth building. Even within our community, there's a lot of Latinos who get upset when I start talking about wealth development, especially because of the politics of each country they come from. And a lot of, for example, Madison is going through central Wisconsin is going through a huge rise in population when it comes to Venezuelan, you know, asylum seekers here. And so they have separate socioeconomic issues than someone who came from Mexico or Central America. So our chamber has had to adapt over the past 5 years to figure out now statewide, what are the demographics? How do we help individualize our products and services for those demographics? And how do we create programming and advocacy around their different individual needs? So whether it's, for example, our DACA. You know, we have a lot of business owners who have children who are DACA recipients. How do we provide advocacy for them, or how do we become resound allies to the DACA movement? Or even with, like you said, in Fort Atkinson and Jefferson County, it's one of our biggest bases of growing businesses, and access to capital is a huge thing for those businesses. So how do we connect them to the right resources? And the beautiful thing is, in the past 5 years, when I started, a lot of businesses didn't know, like, the terms and didn't know how to access you know, I'll say loans or loan products, and now they understand what Kiva is. They understand the difference between a microloan and for me, that's like, I feel like I've gained myself gained some knowledge, but I've also given that knowledge to our community, and our team continues to try to evolve with them. And the population growth of Latinos is now 33% more than 10 years ago. So we went from 280,000 to 446,000 within 10 years. And so the Latino Chamber wants to continue to utilize economic development and wealth development as a tool out of poverty. Yeah. And I say that a lot because it's very important to me.
Yeah. Carolyn, how about you? You came to the foundation in 2015. What's changed in the last 6 years? What have been the initiatives that under your leadership that you've pushed forward?
Sure. Well, the Chamber had a foundation of different sizes and shapes over the last 2 or 3 decades. It had gone through different leaders and taken on different priorities, as is the case in any organization. I was fortunate enough to come here at a time when our new CEO, Suzanne Clark, was the president of the Chamber. And we really put heads together and reimagined a new mission and the kind of impact that the foundation could have in a much bigger way. And I think, put simply, because of the Chamber's ability to reach into companies and reach into communities through local chambers, we had an enormously valuable asset that we weren't utilizing in the best way at the time, which was the ability to bring the business community and employers together with a problem and impact a community in a way that's solution-oriented and much faster than some of the policy and legislative fixes that, of course, need to happen, but we all know they take a really long time, and those other pain points are still here. So I'll give you a couple of examples of some things that we've done to try to live up to that remit that we put in front of ourselves. One is that, we have an incredible national view. And so what can we do with that? One of the things that we did, among many, last summer when the Chamber formulated a new equality of opportunity initiative. And, we knew that our lane was business, and we had so many member companies wanting to help create more equitable outcomes and more income mobility and more equity for education and workers. Well, what could we, the foundation, bring to that? What we did is we partnered with American Express and the 4 national Black chambers who, Jessica, I think you talked about some of the challenges of being a smaller and newer chamber. Those 4 chambers got together as partners just as thick and as wonderful as could be. Together, we formed something called the Coalition to Back Black Businesses. We had a number of large companies who wanted to contribute, and we created a grant program for Black small business owners nationally. And the grant program comprised not just an initial $5,000 grant to help people get through a hard time, particularly pandemic related, where Black business owners were enormously disadvantaged. But we were able, with the generosity of some big companies, to add on a year or more of mentorship and resources on an individualized basis. We're now moving into our 2nd year and our 2nd cohort of that. So it's that ability to look at a national problem, to be able to tap into companies large, medium, and small, to have the partnerships with chambers like the 4 national Black chambers, and put all that together. That has really been enormously successful for us and has really helped us produce for communities that we really care about, particularly those that have even been more disadvantaged by the pandemic.
The optimists say these are examples of these business organizations diversifying their membership, opening up opportunity beyond the traditional bases. The cynics would say it's episodic, right? We're all of our work is being done because of it's a moment in time. How do we send that message of clarity that this is here for the long haul, that this is not not just a snapshot reacting to some constituency or some immediate need, but actually a fundamental shift in the way businesses and organizations like ours are taking on?
Sure. Well, my background is as a communicator, as you mentioned up at the top of the program. And so, I really believe strongly in the power of messages. And collectively, all of us in chambers in the business community need to continue to deliver and show, not tell, the value proposition of business. I think, we can talk a lot about how business, and when business does well, that makes all of those other things that we all want possible. And so it's in all of our interests to have a healthy and functioning democracy and a healthy and functioning economy and healthy and functioning and thriving employer communities, which lead to healthy and functioning and prosperous communities around the nation. And so we see them as really intertwined. You can't have one without the other. And, as my colleagues are fond of saying, they've never met a congressperson or a mayor of a city who didn't want those things in their community. We just have to figure out how to work together and make sure that business is considered an essential partner that it is.
Right. Jessica, you've seen your budget grow. Not enough. We both argue that you still need more resources and we need more assistance, but you've seen your resources grow. Do you get a sense from the businesses that are investing in the chamber that this is something that's here to stay, or this is something that feels a little bit more episodic and you're not sure what the future holds?
No, I think that during COVID, foundations, community organizations, business owners did see us as a necessity for our businesses to exist, a necessity for us to be able to connect with our business owners at different levels, to provide resources to them. We had some of our biggest investments happened during COVID, and our pivot was very fast, and I think that mattered a lot. So the fact that the foundation said, you're a 501c6, we won't hold that against you because we only fund 501c3s, but we want to make sure that you are able to weather the storm. And mind you, COVID, everyone had to shut down, right? So we didn't have the means of sustainability that maybe other chambers who have the longevity and have those partnerships had. But I think our chamber found new allies, new corporate allies, new foundation allies that say, we really care about your mission and we want you to exist.
We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey & Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and EPIC. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.
So let's talk about the pandemic.
Jessica, I've got a question for you. You've got such positive energy, and I'm really getting a sense of the kind of leader that you must be. It must have really served you well during the pandemic. I wonder if there were one or two things that really served you well as a leader and your chamber during that period. What are those couple of things, and what advice would you give to other small chambers, needing to pivot quickly or having resources freeze so quickly?
As a smaller funded chamber, we always struggled to bring in funding. During that time, it was a very make or break time for us. So what did work for us is that we already had a model of resiliency. So, we always have to reinvent ourselves. We always have to figure out how to do things on a minimal budget. And this was no other, scenario, right? We had to pivot quickly. Overnight, we had to learn how we were going to do things virtually. and not just us as a chamber, but also our community. How do we teach our community to use Zoom? How do we teach them to become sustainable through methods that they've never tried before? And we've always tried to encourage them to try, right? Like, we were always like, get a laptop, do your business not from your phone, but from a, so it was a huge like pivot moment for the Latino community. But the beautiful thing is that we had enough support from our members to kind of, recalibrate the way we were going to do things. And one of the recalibrations was, how about we as a chamber do it first, right? How do we become virtually mobile? And then after that, so we, signed up for every virtual model, Zoom, go-to meetings, and we promoted it through, and I know you remember this because you mentioned this, Zach, is we went through Facebook. And we told everybody through Facebook, because that was where the population was. This is going to be, this is this pandemic. We're in emergency mode. In order to continue our classes and our communications, we're going to have to go online. And so we, as a chamber, moved everything first through Facebook, right? We didn't have any other method. And we gave classes on Facebook, connected with our members on Messenger, and then we ended up going through, other methods of communication. So we went virtual in a matter of 3 days, gave classes throughout, classes that were open to the public, free for everyone. Because we know that during a time that we have to be codependent on each other for information, we needed to figure out how to not only find solutions and strategies, but also breathe life into people who are feeling like they are going to lose their lifelines, right? And so in my realm of understanding, our Latino community is very resilient, and they reinvent themselves really quickly. So, how do we get them to reinvent themselves in a way that it's not going to, take them back or cause them to fail? But how do we help them reinvent using tools and partnerships and information that was there? One of the beautiful things about the pandemic, and I know that Zach and I always talk about, is the collective information sharing. And Zach, I want to thank you, because that was one of the moments that when as a leader, I felt very alone, and I wasn't sure how I was going to take the organization forward. And I wasn't even thinking of membership. I was thinking about our businesses. How are they going to, make it through this first month? Because we thought this was only going to last 6 weeks, and it lasted. It's still lasting, right? So that collective unity that was born out of, and I'm going to let you explain it, because I think you, Zach, are a person who saw the need and then said, okay, how are we going to connect all these chambers and all these business associations together to help one another? And so that was our lifeline. That helped us develop best practices around how we were going to disseminate the information to our Latino business owners. And again, we had to translate everything into Spanish because nothing was in Spanish. And so, although we were asking the SBA and different partner groups that we need this information, we had to come up with the information firsthand right away so that they can pivot, right? So Carolyn, that was like, it was basically going with the flow and then, reinventing the way we did things.
Absolutely.
But I was going to say, Zach, one of the things that I was very impressed with is how quickly these groups came together and how you got them to come together to share information and work together.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find silver linings in the pandemic, but I do think that one of them was, we very quickly, as a group of economic organizations, came together, and I think the fact that we're still meeting, right?
Right.
We don't meet daily like we were, but we still meet every 3 weeks. We share information with each other. We tell each other what's going on. I love that, good examples of partnership. We took every bit. We've got a team of 12, and so we were probably the best equipped to digest the information. It was just coming at us like out of a fire hose. So we were able to digest the information, and then what we did was we essentially white labeled it, took our logo off of it, and just said, get it out to your members.
Right.
And at the same time, we partnered and did surveys of businesses, right?
Right.
We surveyed, and we were intentional about making sure that we reached minority-owned businesses. But your team translated, pages and pages of documents in 24 hours or less, right? And I just think it's that type of collaboration that I hope it stays with us, right? I think if you go back to our foundings and the stories that we all told, there were multiple groups in the room for this call to action. And then I think one of the things that we've seen over time is there's been more fragmentation, or maybe even some protection of the incumbency, right? Like, I don't want to let others in. I want to close the door behind me. And I think the pandemic reminded us of the opportunity to work together, but also forced us to work together as well. Carolyn, I'm interested, we had the benefit of a geography, right? We knew the mayor, we knew the county exec, we knew the public health department. You had a much broader task, right? You had, different rules across the country, different needs, different belief systems about whether the pandemic was real or what the solution to it would be. I mean, how did the chamber and the foundation react to what needed to be done in the moment? What did that advocacy look like on behalf of your members?
Yeah, sure. Like every other organization in the country, the pandemic forced us to turn on a dime. I think we had a really crystallizing moment in the first couple of weeks where we realized in a real way that there were two things people needed: Americans, communities, community leaders, businesses, everybody. And that was education and advocacy. And that those were two things that were really core to our mission and core to our skill set. And so in the beginning, we said, we've got to move fast and break some furniture and just try. And I think, to your point about not many silver linings, but if there is one, I think the pandemic allowed us and forced us to forego some bureaucratic slowness, other conditions that, we did things that under the old way, we'd still be talking about whether it could be successful and whether it was a good idea. We just had to go, go, go. And in the early days, it was all about education. And we were in a unique position here to be talking to scientists and to the administration and to chambers around the country. And so the webinars that we did, the education that we did, in fact, one of my favorite stories, because it was the early sign for us of how badly people wanted information. We thought one way that our foundation could really help serve our nonprofit siblings who, are often less resourced, underfunded, and don't have government relations executives like we are fortunate to have as our colleagues in this building. And so we invited our chief policy officer, a brilliant guy named Neil Bradley, to host a webinar specific to nonprofits and how to navigate the PPP process, and what those grants look like and what the repayments look like. We thought, well, maybe 100 people will come. We'll help the nonprofits that are in our ecosystem. We put out the invitation. In 48 hours, we had 6,000 people sign up. By the third day, the morning of the event, we had over 10,000 people sign up for that. So that was kind of the beginning of us seeing the thirst and really seeing that our abilities were unique. And so, like I said, I think the silver lining was letting us move faster than we otherwise might have. But the other thing I would say that's really important here, and we talked about evolution, we talked about whether things are episodic and what's enduring. I think what has gotten us through all these decades and through these hard times is being really clear on our North Star about the role of business in society. As I said earlier, that it's when business does well, it makes all of those other things possible, and that's why we're here. During the pandemic, we tightened down on that a little bit more for about the last 20 months, and that is that we have a really essential role to play in getting the country back to economic health and health. And so we have, through advocacy work, through community work, through philanthropic work, everything we have done has been about recovery in many ways, whether that's, physical resilience, pushing for vaccinations, pushing for masks. We know what works, and we need to get this country and all of our communities and the globe back to health, and making sure that the scientific achievement of getting those vaccines done in a year translates into becoming one of our greatest public health achievements. And we think that can be done with the help of business. So thanks for letting me tell our story about the pandemic. It's not over yet, so we'll have more stories to share, I'm sure.
One of the things, I don't know what the opposite of a silver lining is, but one of the things
Black cloud.
Yeah, black cloud, thank you. One of the black clouds of the pandemic was the hyperpartisanship, right? Like as much as the three of us are talking about how we coalesced, how we created opportunities, there was certainly and remains this cloud of hyperpartisanship. And I'll tell you two stories quickly. One, when I became the president of the chamber, I was told that I didn't need to worry about the U.S. Chamber because the chamber's politics were so divergent from Madison's that you were actually, a membership would be a liability. And so for many years, probably 5 or 6 years, I largely just didn't pay attention. And then right around the time you started, I was also Carolyn, I started Googling words like innovation, inclusion, and because I wanted to know who was doing work in this space. We were moving into that space, and I wanted to understand who else was doing work. And repeatedly, the U.S. Foundation kept coming, U.S. Chamber Foundation just kept coming up as, I even once Googled imagination, and the U.S. Chamber Foundation came up in that conversation. And then I certainly with Suzanne's ascension and taking over as CEO, there's been a change, right? There's been a statement made about bipartisanship and the need to think about the future and what the future might hold. And it's not without risk, and it's not without cost. I mean, I've seen quotes, a prominent senator said that, the U.S. Chamber has now become the woke front, or the front for woke corporations. And some Republican leaders have said they no longer want the endorsement because 23 Democrats for the first time were endorsed by the chamber. A personal story to that, when I was working for Governor Doyle, so working for a Democrat, we were invited to come as an administration. The governor was invited to come to our state manufacturers and chamber, so WMC, the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. And this was under previous leadership. And the governor said no. It came then to the Secretary of Commerce. He said no. He was a Republican, and he still said no. And then I said, I'll go. I was the deputy secretary, or at the time I think maybe I was the senior policy advisor. I said, I'll go. And they were like, why? And I said, because our message should be out there. We should tell the story of what we've done. And so I went into the WMC meeting. The other person speaking was a former state senator who's now a congressman. And I said, look, you have a list of 13 things that you wanted. We did 12 of them. Where's our press conference? Right? Where's our press release? A Democratic administration has done or signed 12 of the 13 things that you said you wanted. And the response from the Senate Majority Leader was, this is war, right? He tells a good story, but at the end of the day, if you don't fund us, we will lose the war. And I walked away from there just discouraged because I thought, like, why is this a war? And I'm curious though, and it's a question for both of you, what I love about this panel is that each of us has political experience, right? We're all running organizations that are trying to make a difference with business as the lens, but each of us has political experience. We all are practiced and savvy political operators. But how do we get to a point where, in this hyper-partisan moment, where bipartisanship not only is required, but is wanted? And I'll start with you, Carolyn. I mean, what does bipartisanship look like for the future of business advocacy?
I think it is absolutely the essential ingredient. We have really leaned in to say we want to be the party and the champion of business. And it's no secret that the chamber will work with anyone who wants to work on pro-business, pro-innovation policies. And, I think it's fair to say that we are not partisan, but we are definitely not neutral. And there has been a lot of lore in the last couple of years about our history with different candidates in different parties, but we are here to say bipartisanship is essential. We've got a divided government, we've got very thin margins, and to your point, there are lots of places that we can collaborate together. I think I mentioned earlier that we have not met many members of Congress who don't want innovation and jobs and growth in their community. So we see a lot of room for collaboration. But more specifically, I want to pick up on what I think was part of your question is how can we kind of activate on those words beyond just saying that we support bipartisanship. And so the Chamber's done a couple of things, three really important things this past year and a half that deserve mention. One is we revamped our congressional scorecard, a voting scorecard, to reward bipartisanship. And that was, an important way that we could really quantify and honor the lawmakers who were making the effort to create bipartisan work. The second is that we created a new and also reinvigorated another awards program to really honor and recognize and highlight those lawmakers who were willing to work across the aisle and bring common sense solutions and just work on good governance and be good adults in the room. That has been enormously popular and has showed that we are acting on what we're talking about. And the third, even though this is not for national audiences, we've created a weekly online interview program called Common Grounds, where we bring together a Republican lawmaker and a Democratic lawmaker. They literally sit down over a cup of coffee for an hour and they check their partisan politics at the door. And for an hour, they talk about places that they might work together, that their parties might work together and how we can get things done. So those are just a few ways that we have really figured out a way to make bipartisanship more front and center because it's something we've always believed in and always will.
Jessica, I think about, you've heard me say, we were one of the first chambers in the country to support a permanent solution for DACA. The U.S. Chamber, same thing, has a position in support of a permanent solution for DACA. But before any of us were doing it, you were talking about it. And Latino chambers, Hispanic chambers around the country were talking about it. And I think it's a credit to that movement that you've built this public support, bipartisan public support. But what does advocacy look like, and what does bipartisanship look like, particularly for organizations that don't have the resources, don't have a dozen lobbyists or 300 lobbyists? I don't know how many lobbyists you have, Carolyn, but a lot of lobbyists and a few lobbyists. But how does an organization like yours work in the space of bipartisanship to the betterment of your community?
I'm going to say that, and I'm just going to start with this. Bipartisanship is essential for the growth of business and the growth of policy around those who are creating growth in business, right? So our DACA recipients, they are a very important part of our future economy. And I think we early on, being, not only associated with many DACA students, parents, business owners that are essential to our economy, who are DACA recipients or who had, have a very emotional tie. Something that both you and Carolyn mentioned was humanity, right? And so I believe that the future of our chamber is going to be based on bipartisanship and the humane investment of our legislators to understand issues as it pertains to the now and not based on divisions and bipartisan creeds, right? Like I want to say, I know that we've talked about this. We talked about it 4 years ago about immigration and the impacts of immigration on our economy and the growth, even in our state, of having driver's license or having access to IDs or anything that would make people who are already part of this economy feel like they are appreciated for their labor, right? And so one of the things that I really I'm against is having a nonpartisan group say you have to stick to this this or a partisan group saying you have to stick to this rule and this is how we've always done it, and you have to continue to, to follow this, this belief, not seeing that there's a human aspect and a human element, and how our communities will continue to suffer if we don't have a more conjoined mechanism to, deliver laws that are really going to impact the future and as a chamber, the future of our economy and our business owners. So, I think that having partners like both the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the Madison Chamber overseeing these issues and saying, you know what, we are confident that you are a viable part of our economy, and we want to help you advocate for your people or your communities, is something that I feel that, at this point, at this juncture, I get a lot of calls from different parties. Right now, Latinos are a hot topic, right? For their votership, for the growth, and I don't want to hear what party you're from. I want to hear what are you going to do to mobilize our economy and help our Latino communities, develop, and be part of our community as. And not as, I always feel like everyone's talking about DEI efforts or, diversity efforts, but unfortunately, we need to start creating more inroads to understanding these populations and creating laws that will invite them in and not extricate them from our communities. So,
agreed. We've talked about the positive, maybe the upside of this change, of this shift in advocacy ideology as a move to being more. I think you said to me in some conversation over the course of time, Carolyn, the party of business, right? That's the party we care about, is the party of business. But what are the downside risks if we don't? I mean, if we fall prey to partisanship or to political pressure, if we back away from our statements about we care about business and wealth and the economy as tantamount. What are the risks if we don't do it? I mean, I'm curious as to what you see the downside risks are. Carolyn?
I think the downside risk is that you'll become irrelevant. The demands on business and related employers and related organizations like ours to take a stand and be something and do something. It's a really hard place to live right now. It's really hard to keep that North Star in place. For example, here at the Chamber, we have long been an ally to the DACA movement. We are pro-immigration reform. For us, that all makes sense because our lane and our well-known space is job creation and opportunity and the economy. And so that makes sense. And it's through that lens that we really have to filter and consider other topics. There are lots of things we haven't weighed in on because it's just simply not, it's just not our lane. And so I think that goes back to having a really clear idea about your mission and your purpose, being able to apply that to the decisions that you make, and constantly showing in a real way the value proposition, not only of your organization and your members, but the greater business community. So those are all the components I would consider part of really being relevant. I have a fourth about relevancy, but I'd like to hear from you two first too.
Jessica, what do you see as downside risks if we don't get this right, or if we don't, as businesses and business advocates, break through the partisanship?
I think there will be slow progression, if any, right? I believe that we're going to continue having these gaps in our economy that could be resolved with, just a mere conversation on how do we get legalization of people or creative ways to getting individuals to be part of our economy. I worked with a congresswoman who was. Her meetings were definitely always with, other, I want to say people from the other side of the aisle, right? Always trying to figure out ways to move certain laws and to move, her theme was poverty. So I think that if we don't create a resolution or an agreement with, or come together as a united front to help our businesses, to help our economy, it's just going to be a slow progression, even more so because of the pandemic.
Yeah, to me, we were built out of unity, right? Each of the stories that we told in the beginning is that we were built in unity, built in the fires of coordinated action, or forged in the fires of coordinated action. I think that the future for us is irrelevance. I mean, right. I think that institutions as a whole are under stress. That the American people mistrust institutions more than they ever have. And we're institutions, right? And if we don't change the way we operate so that what we advocate for, so that people see that we aren't single interest, and that when we talk about business, it's bigger than just a single business or about return on investment or about lower taxes or lower regulations, that it is about community, it is about wealth, it is about health, it is about all of the things that businesses as a solution to these greater problems. I think that we will find ourselves in a place of irrelevancy and ultimately disappear because there won't be that funding of people who say, I agree with what you do. But Carolyn, you said you had a fourth, and I'm curious what the fourth was.
Well, I think a theme that we have all been talking about today is coming together for greater impact and greater action, for best practice sharing, and I think the pandemic has shown how interconnected we are as humans and as communities and as states and a country. But I wanted to give you one example that I love to tell because it's just such a no ego example of some different parties getting together to really make a difference. And this was around second chance hiring, which has been one of our priorities here at the Chamber and at the Foundation. A couple of years ago, about just before the pandemic, the biggest questions that we were getting from people were, I'm interested, it's quite intriguing, I'd like to make a difference in the lives of ex-offenders, but it's a little bit scary. Where would I start? Do I have liabilities? How would I begin? What does good look like? I think I mentioned that earlier. It's a common theme that we get. So we thought, well, we could do the old way and do another white paper that no one would read. Or we can do a more interesting way of really looking at how employers who've taken this plunge, how they did it, and be frank about what are some of their challenges and how they've overcome them. So my team came up with a really creative solution, which was to hire 2 former business journalists from, I think it was Fortune, and a photographer. Now this was of course pre-COVID. And they traveled around the country for a year, visiting prisons, halfway houses, businesses, chambers, all of the members of this ecosystem, and interviewing them and writing stories with original photography about those experiences. And these ranged from, a small bakery or a small restaurant to a machine shop, everyone talking about their challenges. But here was the story that was my biggest takeaway. It was down in the Southwest, I believe it was in Arizona, where there's a worker shortage, especially in the skilled trades, as there is now, but this is, go with me here to a couple of years ago. And so the members of that community said, look, we've got all of these skilled trade jobs we can't fill. We have a prison nearby, a state prison, where, ex-offenders are being released without skills or without a safety net to resume a sturdy and productive life. What can we do here? So the prison officials got together with the chamber, got together with 2 other associations. And you know what they did? So smart. They went in, they created a program in the prison for offenders with 100% best behavior within, I think, 3 or 4 months of scheduled release. They had to apply for the program. If they were accepted, then the Home Builders Association came in and they built in the prison yard essentially a mock-up house. And they trained these guys in prison to be roofers and electricians and and they would tear it down and they would start all over. And, there was a lot of management around that because the prison officials at first weren't wild about, giving power tools to prisoners on the inside of the prison yard. It was hugely successful. And what that meant was, 10 and then 20 and then 30 and then 100 offenders of a variety of different sentences were coming back into society and immediately being skilled for a job with people they had worked with. And so to me, that was just, that wasn't a big government program. That didn't cost millions of dollars. That was a really local program of multiple partners. And those are the kinds of things we'd like to see more of.
Yep. Yeah, I think we'll use that as the perfect illustration of the way the creative thinking, the innovation that comes from organizations, but also the need to be coordinated in our action and to really focus on that collective good. I'll go back to what your Fast Forward program said, Carolyn, celebrating business as a force for good. I hope that our audience today saw a little more insight into what that force looks like and how powerful it can be. I want to thank Carolyn for joining us today. Jessica, thank you for being with us today. And I want to thank our audience for joining us as well. I hope you enjoy the rest of IdeaFest.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Jessica. Really good to be with you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times IdeaFest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first IdeaFest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey and Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and EPIC. Our Friends of IdeaFest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making IdeaFest 2021 a huge success.